For years, scientists have warned that the CASCADIA subduction zone, an enormous fault line off the Pacific Northwest coast, could trigger the most devastating natural disaster in US history. A powerful magnitude 9.0 earthquake, followed by a tsunami reaching up to 30 meters or 100 feet, has long been considered the worst-case scenario. Coastal towns would be submerged. Major cities like Seattle and Portland could suffer catastrophic damage. Roads, bridges and power lines would be destroyed in minutes. But new research has revealed something even more alarming. The shaking and flooding may only be the beginning. As pipelines rupture and industrial facilities collapse, massive fuel spills and chemical leaks could ignite large fires and release toxic plumes into the atmosphere. These deadly clouds could drift across populated areas, turning the air itself into a hazard. Power grids might remain down for half a year or longer. Communication systems could fail. Millions could be stranded without food, water or emergency care. The event would paralyze infrastructure and overwhelm response efforts. This is no longer just an earthquake. It's a chain reaction of disasters involving earth, sea, air and fire. The last known Cascadia megaquake struck at 9 in the evening on January 26, 1700. Scientists pinpointed the time using historical Japanese records that described an unexplained tsunami that struck their coast, an orphan wave that had no local quake to explain it. This evidence, combined with tree ring and sediment analysis in North America, confirms the region's history of massive quakes. That event occurred over 3 centuries ago, and geological records show that such quakes happen here roughly every 300 to 600 years. In other words, the clock is ticking. Experts now predict widespread destruction when the next rupture occurs. Buildings across the region are likely to collapse, especially older ones not built to withstand intense shaking. Infrastructure along rivers and coastal zones, docks, fuel depots, wastewater facilities may be torn apart or swept away. A colossal tsunami would follow minutes later, giving coastal residents little time to escape. Perhaps most unsettling is what comes after the initial impact. Fires fueled by ruptured gas lines and fuel depots could burn unchecked. Combined with toxic emissions from damaged industrial sites, these fires may create vast, poisonous clouds that threaten survivors and first responders alike. Such risks have only recently entered the public conversation, but scientists have begun sounding the alarm. Earthquakes are among the deadliest natural hazards because they strike without warning. While the US has been spared the staggering death tolls seen in places like Haiti, China or Japan, the Pacific Northwest's geological setup makes it highly vulnerable to a disaster of similar or even greater scale. What makes the Cascadia subduction zone especially dangerous is its deceptive silence. It stretches about 1125 kilometers or 700 miles offshore, where the Juan de Fuca plate is being forced beneath the North American plate. Right now, those two plates are locked, quietly accumulating strain. Unlike fault zones such as California's San Andreas, Cascadia doesn't produce frequent small earthquakes, making it seem inactive even though it's anything but. Modern science only began to understand this threat in the 1980s. Indigenous communities had long passed down stories of massive waves and violent shaking, but by the time researchers connected the dots, cities had already been built without earthquake-resistant standards. Much of the region's infrastructure is more than a century old, constructed before the discovery of plate tectonics. These buildings and systems are unprepared for a quake of this scale. Coastal development has expanded into low-lying regions that are extremely vulnerable to both tsunami flooding and changes in land elevation caused by seismic activity. Though the Cascadia subduction zone appears calm when viewed on a year-to-year basis, geological records tell a very different story. Over the past 1,000 years, more than 40 significant earthquakes have occurred along this fault. In the last 7,000 years alone, about 10 of them reached magnitudes greater than 8.5 on the moment magnitude scale, powerful enough to devastate entire regions. Current scientific assessments estimate there is roughly a 1 in 3 chance that a major earthquake will strike the region within the next 50 years. The probability of an extremely powerful event is around 15%. Should one occur, Its consequences could rival the catastrophic 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami in Japan, which remains one of the most expensive natural disasters in recorded history. However, there is a crucial distinction. Japan was prepared. The Pacific Northwest is not. Experts estimate that the region lags nearly 1,000 years behind Japan in terms of earthquake preparedness. Recent research suggests the devastation to cities and communities, many of which lack proper infrastructure and resilience planning, could be far more severe than previously anticipated. The effects of such a megathrust earthquake would begin with intense ground shaking. Coastal zones would be hit the hardest, experiencing ground accelerations that may exceed 1 G, strong enough to hurl people and vehicles into the air. The shaking could last between 3 to 6 minutes, creating a sensation that seems to stretch on endlessly. Inland urban centres may experience slightly less violent shaking due to their distance from the fault line, but the risks there are compounded by dense populations and widespread infrastructure vulnerability. Bridges, water mains, electrical grids, gas pipelines, fuel distribution networks, railroads, ports and airports across the region were not originally engineered to endure the forces unleashed by such a quake. A complete electrical blackout is anticipated across the affected areas. Following the quake, a massive tsunami would surge toward the coast. In some locations near the epicenter, the first wave could arrive within 10 to 15 minutes, leaving residents and visitors with almost no time to escape. Historical data and simulations show that tsunamis are often the deadliest aspect of subduction zone earthquakes. Casualty estimates for such an event in the Pacific Northwest exceed 30,000 lives lost, with projected economic damage surpassing $81 billion. This would make it the most expensive natural disaster ever to strike the United States. And yet, the situation could grow even more dire. Just a few kilometers from downtown Portland, Oregon, along the banks of the Willamette River, lies the state's critical energy infrastructure hub. This facility processes and distributes approximately 90% of Oregon's fuel supply. Massive storage tanks containing jet fuel, gasoline, diesel and other petrochemicals are perched on seismically unstable ground near the river. In a major earthquake, not only would the structural integrity of these tanks be at risk, but the potential for fires, chemical spills and cascading failures across the fuel supply chain could drastically amplify the disaster's reach. Along the banks of the Willamette River, massive petroleum tanks rise beside Portland's industrial corridor. Many of these storage tanks were constructed prior to 1970, long before modern seismic safety standards were established. Their structural vulnerabilities have been recognized for years, especially in the context of a major earthquake. However, recent investigations have unveiled a more alarming reality. Beyond petroleum, these industrial zones, including the critical energy infrastructure hub, contain a wide array of hazardous materials, many of which have not been fully disclosed or accounted for. The key danger lies in a geologic process known as liquefaction. This phenomenon occurs when loose, sandy soils saturated with water lose their strength during intense shaking, effectively turning solid ground into a temporary liquid. Under such conditions, structures built on or buried within these soils, including storage tanks and pipelines, can collapse or rise uncontrollably to the surface. Riverbanks and waterfronts, where soft soils are common, are especially prone to this kind of failure. Unfortunately, these are precisely the areas where some of the most critical and hazardous facilities have been placed. In the event of a powerful earthquake, intense ground shaking would not only stress the tanks, but also generate waves of sloshing liquid inside them. This internal turbulence, combined with external shaking and ground instability, could severely damage the tanks. If liquefaction-induced ground failure occurs simultaneously, it could lead to catastrophic structural breaches. Experts estimate that up to 50% of the stored materials could be released in such a scenario, an environmental disaster comparable in volume to the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, but unfolding in a matter of minutes rather than months. Released chemicals and fuels could rapidly flow into the Willamette River, ignite, and spread toward the densely forested hills of Forest Park. If fire conditions are right, flames could tear through the 2,100-hectare or 5,200-acre expanse of Portland's urban forest. This could endanger as many as 7,000 residents living nearby. In the chaotic aftermath of a megaquake, firefighting resources would be stretched dangerously thin, leaving communities with limited defense against such an inferno, but the devastation wouldn't end with fire alone. The rupture of industrial tanks could release clouds of deadly chemicals into the atmosphere. Gases such as anhydrous ammonia and chlorine pose severe respiratory hazards, creating plumes that could drift across neighborhoods. A recent report examined 4 of the highest-risk facilities and simulated toxic exposure based on prevailing wind patterns. The most lethal scenario would occur during the summer months, when stagnant air could trap toxic gases close to the ground. Under these conditions, over 2,500 fatalities could occur, with hundreds of thousands more potentially exposed to harmful concentrations. Communities in the Linton neighbourhood and those residing along the slopes of Forest Park face especially dire risks. Their proximity to hazardous sites, combined with limited escape routes, makes evacuation during or after such an event a formidable challenge. These areas represent some of the most perilous zones in Oregon should the region be struck by a Cascadia megathrust earthquake. Researchers conducted seismic risk modelling on just 4 industrial sites in North Portland and uncovered a concerning pattern. They identified 70 high-risk facilities situated on liquefiable soils, raising alarm about the region's vulnerability. In Multnomah County, Oregon, over 1,100 industrial facilities operate near residential communities, many of which house volatile and highly toxic chemicals. A recent study identified 70 of these sites as posing particularly high risk due to the nature and quantity of hazardous substances they contain, along with the vulnerability of the land beneath them. A significant number of these facilities are situated on loose, sandy soil, prone to liquefaction during seismic events. When strong shaking occurs, this type of soil can lose its structural integrity, causing tanks, canisters and pipelines to sink, rupture or break apart, potentially releasing clouds of noxious gases into surrounding neighborhoods. Even facilities built on more stable ground are not immune to failure under such extreme conditions. The chemicals stored at these sites are deeply embedded in the regional economy. Substances such as anhydrous ammonia, chlorine, hydrochloric acid, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen chloride, thionyl chloride, diesel toluene and sulfuric acid are used in everything from agriculture and food preservation to semiconductor manufacturing and water treatment. Despite their economic importance, the risks they pose during a catastrophic earthquake are staggering. According to emergency management officials, most of these industrial structures were constructed before modern seismic risks, particularly those posed by the Cascadia subduction zone, were fully understood. As a result, many facilities have not undergone seismic upgrades, even though they now sit in densely populated areas atop unstable soils. The dangers extend far beyond structural collapse. Exposure to many of these chemicals, especially in high concentrations, can lead to severe and sometimes fatal health outcomes. Ammonia, often used as a refrigerant or fertilizer, can cause everything from minor eye and throat irritation to devastating burns across the skin and respiratory system, sometimes resulting in death. Chlorine exposure may lead to wheezing, tightness in the chest, or in more severe cases, lethal respiratory conditions such as pulmonary edema and bronchial infection. The study focused on just 4 high-risk sites in North Portland and along the Highway 30 industrial corridor. Although these were not part of the larger energy hub, they served as models for 2 disaster scenarios based on seasonal wind patterns. Researchers did not assign a specific earthquake magnitude to their projections. Instead, they assessed the likelihood of failure based on when the facilities were built, with older buildings assumed to be the most vulnerable. If such an earthquake occurred during the summer, prevailing northwest to southeast winds could carry toxic fumes into populated areas, potentially causing 1,700 injuries and 2,500 deaths. In winter, the wind typically reverses, pushing pollutants from the southeast into the northwest, resulting in an estimated 18,000 injuries and over 1,100 deaths, some of them reaching into Washington state. Summer would likely be deadlier in terms of fatalities, researchers warned, because stagnant air would allow toxic gases to accumulate. In winter, the wider spread of fumes would increase the total number of people affected, even if individual exposure levels might be lower. Despite these harrowing figures, scientists involved in the study emphasized that the casualty estimates were likely conservative. Lead researcher Luke Hanst from Portland State University noted that the model accounted for only 4 facilities and did not factor in widespread hospital damage or the inability of emergency services to reach victims. With hospitals overwhelmed or incapacitated and even high-quality masks proving ineffective against gases like ammonia, those exposed would have to decontaminate themselves using large amounts of clean water, a resource that could be severely limited if the water infrastructure is compromised. Predicting which neighborhoods would suffer the most remains impossible. The reach and concentration of airborne toxins would be shaped by real-time atmospheric conditions including wind speed, humidity, temperature and rainfall at the moment the earthquake strikes. For residents like Nancy Heiser of northwest Portland's Linton neighborhood, the findings are deeply unsettling. As the former chair of her local emergency team, she already feared the risk of explosions, wildfires and landslides. Learning about the threat of chemical plumes adds yet another layer of dread. She lamented that the community lacks effective evacuation routes and worries that even the river might ignite in the event of a large-scale disaster. Companies that handle hazardous chemicals are required to comply with strict regulations concerning worker safety and emergency preparedness, including maintaining detailed records and comprehensive emergency response plans as mandated by both state and federal agencies. However, these measures offer little protection in the event of a major earthquake, which could still lead to the uncontrolled release of toxic substances. One of the significant difficulties faced by residents of Portland lies in the lack of transparency surrounding the locations and inventories of these chemical storage sites. While companies are obligated to report the types and quantities of chemicals they store to the Oregon State Fire Marshal's office, as well as their facility locations, this information is not made publicly accessible due to fears related to terrorism and potential sabotage. To gain access to the data needed for analysis, researchers at Portland State University were required to anonymize all facility-specific details in their report. This condition allowed them to proceed while maintaining the confidentiality required by state officials. There is, however, a limited pathway for public access. Local residents may request general information about the types and approximate quantities of hazardous chemicals at a specific facility. In order to do so, they must provide the facility's address along with their own name, address, and a justification for the request. Even then, the precise storage locations within the site remain undisclosed. Despite this option, the majority of residents are unaware of the existence of these facilities in their communities. This lack of awareness was one of the driving forces behind the county's decision to commission the report, with the goal of empowering residents to become more informed and proactive about the chemical risks present in their neighborhoods. The cascading consequences of a major earthquake in the region are staggering. Toxic chemical clouds could be released, wildfires might ignite in forested hills, and key infrastructure like buildings and bridges could crumble. These scenarios paint an apocalyptic picture, but the full extent of the danger goes even further. Climate change may significantly amplify the damage. And this isn't unique to Portland. Similar seismic threats extend throughout the Pacific Northwest. Along the coast, the slow-motion collision of tectonic plates sets the stage for disaster. The Juan de Fuca Plate continues its descent beneath the North American plate, gradually lifting the land. While this uplift has helped counteract some of the effects of sea level rise so far, that benefit is temporary. When the next massive earthquake strikes, the terrain could abruptly drop by nearly 2 meters or about 6 feet. This sudden land subsidence is equivalent to centuries' worth of climate-driven sea level rise occurring in mere minutes. Scientists estimate that such a drop could expand floodplains across the western United States by as much as 300 square kilometers, or roughly 115 square miles. As a result, thousands more homes, businesses and roads would be at permanent risk of flooding. The impact becomes even more severe if the quake doesn't occur until the year 2100, by which time sea levels are projected to be significantly higher. The subsidence would then compound the already expanded flood zones, potentially tripling the number of people and structures exposed to chronic flooding. Faced with these terrifying possibilities, the question arises: should everyone living within about 160 kilometers or 100 miles of the Pacific Northwest coastline consider relocating? While the threat is real, it's important to recognize that no region is entirely free from climate and disaster risk. Fortunately, these are challenges that can be addressed with knowledge and action. Much of the existing infrastructure, bridges, buildings and fuel tanks can be retrofitted to withstand powerful seismic shaking. Modern construction methods and adherence to stringent building codes allow for the development of fuel storage facilities that remain stable even during intense ground movement. Beyond engineering solutions, preparedness at the individual and community level is crucial. Emergency kits and go bags help, but readiness goes far beyond stockpiling supplies. According to emergency management professionals, the most vital form of preparation is building strong social connections. In the aftermath of disasters, communities often display remarkable cooperation. Knowing your neighbours, whether they are nurses, ham radio operators, or have access to vital medical supplies, can mean the difference between chaos and collective resilience. This spirit of mutual support often emerges in moments of crisis. Understanding the specific risks facing your home, school, or workplace is a vital first step. Developing a plan with family and co-workers for a variety of emergency scenarios and maintaining open communication within the neighbourhood can significantly increase chances of survival and recovery. Ultimately, the science is clear, the risks are known, and the tools for preparation are available. The question is not just what might happen, but how society chooses to respond before it does. Thanks for watching. As we've seen, the danger isn't just beneath our feet with the threat of a massive earthquake, it's also in the very air we breathe, hidden behind the walls of industrial zones that few of us know even exist. The time to be informed is now, before disaster strikes. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to stay updated on the hidden risks that surround us and what we can do to stay safe. Your awareness could make all the difference.